Well, I have got 20 years of higher education administration. I used to work for the Chancellor at UNC-Chapel Hill and a vice president at Mercer University in finance. And when my husband, I'm a veteran's widow, passed away from Agent Orange, I moved back to my home city of Macon, Georgia from Chapel Hill, and I obtained my job in the president's office at the campus now called Middle Georgia State University. I got there in 1993, and I worked there for 15 years. And I had exceeds expectations annual evaluations. However, the last 3 years I was there, I was very uncomfortable with the fact that I was mandated to falsify the president's leave reports. I felt sorry for him because his wife had passed away, and so I was very understanding that there was a situation, but it continued for 3 years. And it was to a point where I was told, and I have it on record, that to reduce his speaking engagements, don't make any appointments, and to run the college. It got to a point where even my computer was set up so that I can send emails to the campus, but it looked like it came from him, but it came from me. And for 3 years, I went downstairs to the vice president for finance and said, I'm uncomfortable falsifying his documents. And he said, well, we know he's got an issue, and eventually we'll speak to the Board of Regents. And they never did. This continued for 3 years. So finally, on September 15th of 2008, I submitted a leave report to the president, and I had a very gracious note on there. I said, due to the increasing auditing guidelines, I prefer that it be best that you fill out your own leave reports. 9 days later, I was terminated.
Yeah, and if I can add a little perspective on that, you know, President Bell wasn't asking Denise to falsify his leave reports by 15 minutes or an afternoon every other week or something. He was almost never there 100% of the time. Right. And she was being asked to falsify as if he were actually there.
He got a $400,000 bonus check when he retired. And when I was asked, the faculty member came to me in the public street one day and said, we heard that he's being even given $400,000 bonus check. Deferred compensation is what they call it. And I went and she said, we want to know, and we need some answers because he's not mentally competent to run the college. And so I asked him one day, I said, I've been asked to ask about your $400,000 check. And his immediate response to me was, it's none of their business. Well, I was right before my termination, there were so many issues legally about the fact that everybody knew that he was not competent to run the college, that they hired a John Cole, an attorney, and he said, she knows too much. I was told off the record, she knows too much. We've got to get rid of her. So they used a phone call that came in that particular day. It was from his president's son who called me at home because his father wouldn't speak to him. In other words, I was basically the gatekeeper between his family also because of his mental illness. And the son would call me and beg me to get his father on the phone. And that particular day that I was terminated, his son had called begging me and crying, saying, please get my father on the phone. And the father, the president, David Bell, looked at me when I tried to get him on the phone and started laughing and saying, tell him adios, I'm not speaking to him. And I just looked at him, I said, he just wants to speak to you for a moment. And John Cole said, insubordination, she's gone. And keep in mind that I was a veteran's widow fighting the VA too and raising 3 children on my own. I lost my home because of that day. I lost my home to bankruptcy, foreclosure, and I filed bankruptcy later. I walked in because of my credentials. I walked in as his assistant and I left, and I had exceeds expectations and all of these. I even filed investigation for the Office of Inspector General in Georgia, and they had to close it because there were no documents available.
Denise, just to clarify something that's important legally, was John Cole present when you had that disputed conversation with?
Yes, absolutely.
And is he the one who said you're fired, or did President Bell
he told Dr. Bell to do it, but
President Bell fired you?
Yes.
That's very legally significant, so I wanted to correct that.
Yes. Oh, I was told by a source that not 5 minutes after I left that office, that the facilities maintenance department was called to my office to remove my computer and to destroy all the files. What they didn't know is that I had scanned all the documents they had asked me to falsify for 3 years and had it on my USB drive in my purse as I walked out. Those documents are still sealed today. They were sealed by former Attorney General Sam Owens, and Attorney General Chris Carr filed on February 15th of 2019 another opposition. I have personally filed 6 motions to lift the protective orders, and he even opposed it.
Well, one funny thing is Chris Carr has publicly stated that they're not under seal. Which they
I
are.
have him on YouTube. I had during his campaign. You would love this. I sent you the link. I have a friend in North Atlanta, and when he was campaigning for to be reelected for Attorney General on August 26th of 2018, she called me and she said, Denise, what question do you want me to ask Attorney General Chris Carr? And I said, ask him why he sealed my documents. And she's the first person in that forum. It's on YouTube. You can see it right now. And when she asked him, he started laughing. He's saying, those documents aren't sealed. They're not sealed. And he repeatedly said that. And then 6 months later, he filed another opposition to my motion to lift the protective order. I have charts and documents that you would not believe. If I showed you the calendar right now, it's all red. Almost every day says not reported, not reported. He would come in at noon almost every day. When he would come in at noon, close his door and lock it and sleep on the sofa and then leave at 1:30 to go to his psychiatric appointment. By the way, he's deceased now, so I have no problem discussing this. They're still protecting the fact that I had the dedicated service and I lost everything, but he left he was a millionaire. I'm going to give you another example. Do you remember Chancellor Stephen Porch years ago when he was also another official? He was hired as a consultant after he left. He was paid over $823,000. This was reported in the Atlanta Journal. In other words, there's no fiscal accountability. They have exclusive authority to the Constitution to do whatever they want with over billions of dollars. Are you aware that tuition, it was reported, has gone up 88.7% in 15 years? I used to process the paperwork, but I do have all the documents that are sealed. I have them in safekeeping. I have every one of them. And we're not even going to talk about the porn that I got from one trustee to the president. I mean, I've got a lot more than you realize. I tried to go to the federal, and they said to start with a private attorney, and I did. The interesting thing about it is every time the Board of Regents came into the court, he got a summary judgment with no explanation. I mean, with virtually no explanation to the facts that I was presenting. I have probably a whole room full of notebooks. I'm a criminal justice major, by the way, you can tell.
I represented Denise, unfortunately, after her case had already been thrown out by the courts. She was actually very ably represented by the private attorneys before me. But the significant thing I think about Denise's case is here's somebody who's a whistleblower, came forward, did the right thing, refused to falsify documents, which is a felony, by the way, and refused to do it, was fired for it. And no entity in the state of Georgia came to her aid. We've talked about how the Attorney General, who should be helping her, has been against her. The Board of Regents ignored her. She went to court, and this is very troubling. You think, well, if these executives are corrupt and acting corruptly, then you have recourse in the courts. The courts just bastardized the law to throw Denise's case out. She's mentioned one of the things they did, which is to grant summary judgment against her with no explanation whatsoever. No explanation. And that I actually have a legislative reform proposal in the House that a court cannot issue a final dispositive ruling without citing a single fact or a single legal authority. Just say, Denise Caldon, summary judgment against you. We can't say why. That's one thing. So she went up to the Court of Appeals with another attorney who argued her case very ably and presented that she did have a whistleblower claim and it should not have been dismissed. The courts, and this is, I talked about this in Anthony's case, made rulings that are completely contrary to the existing controlling law. It's in a specific case to protect the state, but it creates bad law for everyone. So for example, I mentioned earlier, Dr. Bell actually fired her. And the court said, well, Dr. Bell had another reason besides the whistleblowing to fire her. You know, the reason was that Denise was supposedly rude to him one day about the phone conversation with his son. So therefore, after 15 years of excellent service, she should be fired for insubordination. In a whistleblower case, you call that a pretext. Was she really fired for refusing to falsify his records, or was she really fired because she was rude to him one day? You know, whistleblower law says, you know, a whistleblower can be fired for another reason if there's really another sound reason to fire the person. But it also says that the person who Denise made the report against cannot be the person who comes up with the alternative reason, and that just makes good common. The courts ignored that law. Well, so she had a trial court judge who issued what I call non-rulings, said, Denise, you're denied, you're dismissed, your summary judgment against you. I can't say why, one sentence order, no explanation. Went up to the Court of Appeals, and her attorney very ably argued these issues. And the Court of Appeals is a 3-judge panel who just completely ignored the law and said that the president, who she reported his wrongdoing, and he was the person who could offer the alternate pretext for her firing. Well, it's a serious problem in general, not just in Denise's case, where we almost don't have 2 separate branches of government, because although, for example, you know, Supreme Court and Court of Appeals judges are supposed to be elected under the Constitution, they all that happens now is they resign midterm and the government appoints their appeals judges anymore. They're all appointed. And so we have judges basically giving the appearance of doing the bidding and currying favor with the people who appointed them. Almost do not have 2 separate branches of government. It's very disappointing that there is no entity in the state government that supported Denise. Not the courts, not the Inspector General, not the Attorney General, not the Board of Regents, not anybody. And that is something that needs to be addressed. And the Attorney General actually has a conflict because the Attorney General is supposed to investigate and prosecute crime and corruption in state government, but is also charged with defending state government. Proposed in the draft legislation, one is an actual independent Inspector General that does something. Another is expanded whistleblower protection. So for example, state law now only protects a state employee who is harmed in their employment. So they could, for example, could have harmed Denise in other ways besides firing her, and she wouldn't have a whistleblower claim. You know, I'm an attorney, private attorney, who has effectively been a whistleblower, you know, exposing, you know, millions of dollars of corruption in state government. They can retaliate against me for exposing that, and I have no, you know, whistleblower claim for corruption. So, and the other thing, a special prosecutor is another idea. There's now a provision in state law already that the governor can appoint an independent investigator where the attorney general is compromised, as Chris Carr is in Denise's case. To appoint an independent investigator, they have never even responded to those letters.
4 of us met with Chairman Senator Lindsey Tippins last February in his office and gave him an earful about what we're telling you today. We never heard from him after that. Chairman of the Senate Higher Education Committee, Senator James Butterworth, from years ago. He was the chairman of the Senate Higher Education Committee. I have walked the halls for 9 years and knocking on their doors. And I finally got into his office and talked to him. And 3 weeks later, Nathan Deal pushed him out of the Senate and put him over the National Guard. It's a quote to me, or an email to me from Senator James Butterworth. It said, "You need to understand that there is almost nothing we can do as a response to information which you have presented to us. We are not an oversight committee of the Board of Regents." And that's the Higher Education Committee.
And that is part of my reform proposal, is there needs to be real legislative oversight. And the legislature needs to push back in these cases where the courts basically change the law. Create a terrible precedent in Denise's case, saying that, President Bell could come up with the pretext for firing her, saying, "I didn't fire her because she blew the whistle on me. I fired her because she was rude to me one day." And that is not the legal standard. And that creates a terrible legal precedent for everybody else who ever comes to court. And the legislature needs to push back, and it has the power to restore those legal standards and write legislation and say that is not the standard for whistleblower protection in Georgia.
In my book that I wrote about the VA, I have been encouraged to write another book about the Board of Regents. And of course, you mentioned the title. It'll be called The Untouchables if I do it. But keep in mind that I've actually reached out to Attorney General Chris Carr many, many times and said, I would like to address this privately instead of publicly for the benefit of all. I never heard from him.
We're asking for basic accountability.
Yes.
And the state of Georgia will not provide it. When it comes to claiming sovereign immunity, there is no accountability in Georgia government today.
I would like to add one last thing. You need to understand that the reason I do what I do is because these are missions that I never asked for, but I've accepted them. It's the VA and the higher education corruption. And I have decided that if we don't fight for our rights now, our children and grandchildren will not have any.